Welcome to Pivot Points, a new series featuring some of the world's most successful women, candidly sharing their stories and insights about how they made it to the top and how you can too. Hosted by Pernille Yeatman, a straight-talking global executive and award-winning author who created the career and life of her dreams and now wants to help other ambitious women do the same. Due to technical difficulties during the original recording, the voices in the following interview may seem out of sync in a few places.
Hi, this is Pernille Yeatman, host of Pivot Points. I can't wait to introduce you to my next guest. She and I first met when we were both serving on a council, the Corporate Partnership Council for Save the Children. And I knew right off the bat that I was going to love her. Not only was she Danish, as is my husband, my stepson, and my daughter, but she's also just a great all-round professional and wonderful human being. She built a 21-year career at IKEA, ending up as the first and only woman, but certainly as the CEO and president of IKEA North America. She then went on also to be the global head of HR, where the decisions that she made about the policies and the practices of IKEA affected more than 135,000 employees around the world. Today, she serves on both corporate and nonprofit boards, Save the Children, as I mentioned, but also on the Meijer Corporation. And most recently, she and her daughter founded a new online resource that I really recommend for everybody. It's called Good Life Designed, and there's a companion book, Design Your Life. Who am I talking about? Her name is Pernille Spiers-Lopez, and I'm delighted to introduce you to her today. Pernille, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
For those who didn't get to read your book, I loved one of the things that you talked about early on, which is that you basically, your first foray into your career was actually a failure, and that failure, you believe, really helped you succeed. So for a lot of our listeners, they're in what we call the launch phase, trying to land that first important job or that job that really makes a difference in their lives and launches their career in the right direction. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened early on for you that you think really helped set you up for success?
Well, first of all, I think my first failure was actually I went to school to be a journalist and in Denmark, and after about a year as a freelance journalist, not being able to really get good jobs right off. I was very young compared to everybody else and pretty inexperienced. So after a year of being a freelance journalist in Denmark, I realized that I had to just say, maybe there's something else in life for me than this, or at least not now. So I actually decided to leave journalism, and I'd always wanted to travel and possibly live somewhere outside Denmark. And I had some connections with the U.S., and I was very interested in design and home furnishings. So I actually thought of starting a company together with a friend, and we started a company that ended up exporting Danish design to the U.S. My job was to go to the U.S. and import it and wholesale it in the U.S. And that is really how I landed in the U.S. I started out in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with a small import company, and that I did for about 2 years. I was, at that point, you could say I was inexperienced and didn't do as good of a job in research as people are doing today as they start their first company. And so after 2.5 years, I had worked very hard, drove 60,000 miles all around Florida, and I realized it was time to probably give it up. I had really some great new clients, and there was some stuff that was happening to move, but I was out of money, out of energy, out of confidence, and I kind of said, it's time to let that go. So after a couple of failures, and along the way I had met this guy, John Guarino, who was head of a small, actually it was a pretty big furniture company in Florida, and he had asked me if I ever wanted to have a real job, if I would contact him. And so that was a perfect time for me to remember to call him because I needed a real job. And that was really, in a lot of ways, the beginning of a 30-year career within home furnishings and retail. And it was a $5 an hour sales job on the floor. Don't ever be afraid of starting at the bottom, and don't be a job snob, because you never know.
You say that, because I sometimes share my story, and the truth is that I knew what career I wanted, but I had virtually no qualifications for that career, and so I had set a deadline for myself. I graduated in June, and by September 1st, I had to have a job in my profession. And I got to about mid-August, and I still hadn't found a job, and I ended up taking a job where I was the second hire in for this small PR firm. And I was hired literally to, wash the coffee mugs, make the coffee, answer the telephones, handle the bills, whatever else. But I also was an account executive. And so it was exactly that. It was the bottom of the bottom. And I made $13,000 a year. And it was really hard to live on $13,000 a year since I wanted to have my own apartment. But what was interesting about that is what you said is, first of all, it turned out to be the most amazing learning experience because I had to do all of those things. I actually learned how much do things cost, and what are all the things that actually need to be paid for running a business, and how much do you have to charge for an account executive to actually make money on them in a multiple. And so it turned out to be great. So I agree with you. I tell people now, just take a job where you can learn, you can grow, you can learn what work is all about. And if it's in your profession, even better, or in your passion area, even better. But you just have to break in. And so I think that's great advice. So let me ask you, so you get in, and I know that what happened in that job, I believe, is that ultimately that furniture company was acquired by IKEA. So there you are, you're in IKEA, a huge, wildly successful company, certainly in Europe. I know that you really helped put it on the map in the US. There's so much stress on women. And a lot of women simply decide it's not worth it. And they just think, if my husband can pay my way, then I'm just going to step out because it's just not, I can't make enough money, and it's just not worth the stress and the guilt and whatever. Can you talk to us about how did you make that choice? How did you balance home and work, and what compromises did you make in order to make that happen?
Well, I would say number one is that choosing the right partner. I think I did a really fantastic job. I mean, I have an incredible husband that we both agreed that we would both follow our passion and both work, and that we would figure this out together. And I would say that I think that a couple of important things from the beginning, not that I ever became very good at balancing all of it, but I think it is that we actually, as women, we have to be quite clear on what it is that we want, and also what are we willing to share. And what I mean with that is that I had to accept that there would be other people helping me take care of my children, that it was okay that we had a nanny that the kids were very close with, that I had somebody that would help me clean the house, and that I actually couldn't do it all. And that was, I was actually pretty good at that. And I saw the important thing of, and I even see that today, that my kids had really good people around that they trusted, and that they became very sociable very early on because of my husband and I sharing caretaking with others and some fabulous people. I would say that being able to do that and create a team around you at home, just as you do at work, is critical. And I think over time, what happened for me was that I kept on taking on more, bigger and bigger jobs. I think the biggest challenge that over time was I lost touch with myself, and I just did too much and kept on adding on without really assessing how to also fit in time for myself, and some, reflections on what really is happening. So just coming back, I think in mid-career is really important to have the right partner, be willing to have a strong team and delegate at home, just like you do at work, and not be overwhelmed, because once you step into a job, once you have young children, you figure it out. And I think we need women to be in the workplace. We need women to take on big jobs. And I think together we can create better solutions for how to, manage our personal lives and make sure that our children get the very best. And sometimes that's not by us being home.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I often, because I love being a mom so much, and people often ask me, so, weren't you tempted just to, kind of give it up and stay home? And I just thought, I was home for a bit when she was first born. And I realized in that period that I loved being a mom like I never imagined I could possibly love being a mom. But I also realized I could never be a 24/7, 365 mom and actually be happy. I needed intellectual stimulation.
Yeah.
I needed other people to hang out with, to talk about things that weren't related to my children. And so I agree with you. I think that we need to recognize that we are whole people. And I think the idea of, I love what you say in your book, it's really not about work-life balance, because it doesn't really balance. And so all of us who are sitting there like with the little, trying to get equilibrium, it's like, forget equilibrium. But it is about being able to make it all, figuring out what you really want, and then figuring out how to make that work for you without the guilt and without feeling completely overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, Perry, that working through why we feel guilty, working through what it is that we really want. Because I think that is a really, really bad combination, guilt and not knowing what we want. I've been there, and I think many women and of course also men have been there. It is a terrible place to be, because you're not clear on what you're asking for, and therefore you're not getting it. And at the same time, no matter what you do, you feel you should be doing something else, and is sort of equal to guilt. So the more clarity about what you want, what you need, makes you much more open to, or there's much more of a likelihood of you getting what you ask for.
You happen to stay in a lot of the same industry, and even for the same company for more than 2 decades. But in each of those moves, you had to negotiate each of these transitions. I know you relocated many times. You clearly had to negotiate with your husband in terms of not only relocation, but also his job kept changing too, because he was advancing, as you said. We read the research, and it says women are so negatively perceived for negotiating on pay, for example, right? Men are assertive, women are aggressive, all these things. Tell me, how do you negotiate effectively for what you want, both personally and professionally? Because if we can't do that, as you say, we're not going to be able to get there.
I mean, I wouldn't say I am an effective negotiator, but I think what I have done all along, and I want to kind of talk about it in 2 pieces, because one, I think, is for myself, but then also as an HR person. What I always have felt is that if I actually do the homework and actually myself know what it is I want and what it is that's going to make me happy and what is also non-negotiable. If I go to a person that I'm going to be working for and say, here is the 4 things that really are very, very important for me to take this job. And I've done the research and I know what that kind of job pays. And then if I put that forward, and then they come back and say, well, not this, that, and that, you have to be very clear on when you actually say no. I think when you've done your research and you're not necessarily just wanting to bargain and negotiate, like you really set your bar for what it is you're worth, what you want, and what's non-negotiable. Because sometimes you also have to walk away. You have to walk away if it isn't good enough. Sometimes you can be negotiating about pay, but if it is so low that it's not really recognizing your experience and skills, you need to just say no. Because I think that also sets off a wrong relationship. I have found that when I'm clear on what it is I want and I'm being reasonable and they can tell that I'm not just trying to ask for the moon and I haven't done my part, I would say a big part of the time it just happens. I'll never forget when I could not ask my family to move to Philadelphia when I took a job as HR manager for North America. I just could not ask my family to move. I just set out, I need to do this job from Pittsburgh. And I thought it was the most brave and ridiculous demand I've ever had. And he said, yeah, that's not a problem. Let's work that out.
There you go.
And I was so nervous about asking about it. when we're clear what we want and we've done our research, we're reasonable, we've checked it out, then just ask for it and then be clear on this aspect of what is not negotiable. From an HR perspective, I do believe that HR people, professionals, have a huge responsibility in making sure that there is no gender gap and really bring that to the forefront. And also when they present salary suggestions, that we really, really make sure that we don't have sort of that gender lens on, that we can get women for a little bit less. And we should really, we fall into the pressure of guys maybe being better at negotiating. I think HR managers have a huge responsibility in kind of stopping that game. There's just no reason that anybody today, with all the research that's available, there's no reason that a woman should be paid at all any less than a man, of course. And to have still have that in companies is, I think, we as a profession have a big responsibility in why it happened and also in making it right.
I couldn't agree more. And I do also agree that if you've done your homework and you are reasonable and you can articulate why you're asking for what you're asking for and simultaneously be able to make clear for the company what you can give in return for what you're asking for, my experience is that, yes, I have actually gotten an amazing amount of things that I never thought that I would be able to get. And people say, wow, you must be an amazing negotiator. But like you, I don't know that I'm an amazing negotiator. I think I'm just really direct. I'm very clear. I'm very direct. And I always look at everything as a win-win. So I know they have to get something from me that they really want and need. And I have to know whether I am willing and able to give what they want in exchange for what it is that I want. So I think that's great advice. I'm absolutely disgusted by it, but it's true that the research says that as women move up, they are less likely to be liked or likable, irrespective of the woman, right? Whereas when men move up, by definition, almost irrespective of the man, they become more liked. So as you were moving up and you get to the top, were there places where you had to choose between being liked or respected? And if there were, how did you make that choice?
I would say, Perry, that if there's one thing that has been consistent with me throughout my whole career, is that I don't believe I have ever left who I am. And I have always had been kind of grounded in my values and sort of the Scandinavian, I would say humbleness. And I feel that I have always been true to who I am. And no matter what job I've had, I have always made it quite important to be able to communicate and talk to anybody along the way. So I can be as comfortable speaking with people in the warehouse as I am with speaking with the owner of the company. And I've always been able to do that. So I have always focused on just being true to who I am. And I think that has served me well. And then I think as higher I got up in the organization, there were times where I really felt that people did not like me. And I learned that it really wasn't like they didn't like me as Pernille. They were just frustrated with the company and therefore with me and my management team. And I was considered management. And I think that comes with the job. And I think for me, it has just been always trying to have my feet on the ground and keep moving at being who I am. Having that said, I have had jobs, and I think especially, of course, as running North America, it was a huge sort of magnifying glass on you and every move you make. But I would say the biggest challenge actually when I was in some of the management groups as HR manager, because I was the only woman in some of them, and HR I felt was often that sort of a function where people were always either frustrated with HR, or what we were asking for was more money for employees, or get them really holding people accountable for how they were managing their people, or the culture, or what we needed to do in terms of develop succession, whatever it was. I just felt in those roles I was very alone, and I felt that people would just going at me. And I remember at the time, I couldn't really figure out, was this because of me? Was it because I was a woman? Was it because of HR? And I actually came to the conclusion that it was because of a little bit of this focus on with HR. And it did give me, over time, just that understanding that it is actually, the higher you get in an organization, I do think the culture is so much tougher. And I am very, very convinced that it is so much tougher for everyone, but it is tougher because it is a male culture that is created by males for males. And I would say that in organizations where you have more female values at the top, and it doesn't mean that it's just women, there's also male leaders that have a better balance. And I think those are the environments where you don't have to be so negative and, devil's advocates and constantly, trying to take somebody down or argue their point, that it becomes much more about expanding and developing and including. And I today are in a couple of boards and places where I feel there is, men and women have created a different culture at the top. But I've also in the past seen and once in a while peek my head into places where it's still very, very traditional, very kind of male action oriented. And if you don't step it up, you sort of get pulled down. And that is an environment that's very, very unhealthy for women. But it's also unhealthy for good male leaders. Absolutely. So I think for me, it really is, I feel like I've always been able to stay true to myself. And I've become much more experienced and good at kind of separating what's personal and what's just part of the environment. And now I feel I can also be part of developing cultures wherever I am.
So let me ask you another question about being at the top. We see it constantly. Women are just more scrutinized than their male peers. I mean, in part that might be because there's just fewer of us at the top. But if you think about it, it's not just on performance. A recent Wall Street Journal article said there's a much higher likelihood that a woman at the top of a company is more likely to get attacked by an activist investor than a man by, like a huge margin. But not just performance, it's on looks, right? How many things have we heard in this presidential cycle? How many things have we heard about female CEOs where it's about the hairstyle, or she looks tired, or she looks old, or she looks whatever? You don't see that, other than Donald's hair, you don't see a lot of commentary about what men look like, or parenting. If a woman makes a parenting choice, everybody looks at that. Whereas men make parenting choices every day as male CEOs, but they aren't necessarily reflected in the media, for example. So did you experience, you feel, increased public scrutiny because you were a woman? And how did you handle that? Did you have like a go-to uniform where it just kind of took your looks out of the way?
In my experience, I don't feel like I was really scrutinized for my look, or I felt I had a very good experience. When I was head of IKEA North America, I don't think people looked to me for some of those things. I felt a very positive experience externally, but I don't mean that happens all the time. I just didn't have any negative feeling or sort of experiences with that. I think it was much more difficult inside the company. It was much more difficult. I think the real criticism are definitely inside. I mean, I was definitely, as I was trying to work in a different way, add female values, have more of an inclusive management team and discussion. And it was just, I think, a difficult time. And I was always criticized for not being, P&L savvy. And I was, much more focused on HR. And so I think it was just a time of real scrutiny over everything I did. And that was tough for 9 years to feel, constant questioning. But then I kind of grew up and realized that, everybody's being questioned. But I do think that there was a lot of people that had a real tough time with me having that job. And then there was always my boss was just unbelievable supportive along the way. I do think that it is still very difficult for women in top positions to just be who they are and just do their job. there's a lot more criticism and a lot more scrutiny. There's no question about that. But I think it is getting much better. And I do feel that the media needs to stop doing that, of course. But I think it happens when we as women are stopping also looking at each other for those kind of things. And I think all of us have a responsibility as women to not have those conversations about other women and be focusing on what we are here to do. And when somebody says something about, well, I don't think she is spending a lot of time with her kid, well, maybe we need to say, I don't think you know that, and on and on and on. So I think as women, no matter where we are, we all need to be good leaders. You know, whatever you wish for the future, you really need to live every day yourself. And I don't think women are always supportive of women in top positions. And women in top positions are not always good leaders. And so there's so many aspects of it. There's for sure still much more scrutiny on women. And it's definitely not a level playing field. And there's many, many different things I think we need to do to get there.
That's so true. I think that it crushes me when women beat up other women. If we can't figure out how not to make those things matter, then how can we expect anybody else to accept that those things don't matter and to stop being so harsh with each other? So I'm right there with you on the women's question.
One example of it, I mean, the fact that Hillary might be one question, but I just had one example. I think, people's obsession about Adele's weight. I mean, really? Is that like, when you think about what that woman is doing and the impact she has and the talent she has, that is even a question, I just think is just tells us that we are held to those standards, and certainly by women ourselves.
And I find myself doing it too. And I find that what I've tried to do over the years is to recognize that because I was raised in that kind of environment, I do notice those things. But what I've at least tried to master is I just bite my tongue, so that even if I notice, I do not say anything either, to anybody, because I'm conscious of it for me, I'm conscious of it for other people, but I'm trying for all of us to just put it aside and move on and focus on what is the heart of the issue, what's the heart of the person, and not worry about the superficial stuff, because it just really is a distraction from what truly matters.
Absolutely.
So we often hear that it's lonely at the top, and I think that's even more so for women. For somebody who's climbing the ladder, who is your support system these days? How did you find female friends that you had things in common with, that you were interested in, and that you also could feel really safe with, so that you could be who you are and process some of life's challenges, because God knows we all face them?
I think that's a very important point, and I can say that there was a time in my career where there was one or two people within IKEA that were at a similar level to me, but we weren't on the same continent, so it was difficult to stay connected with. But what I did, I actually joined two organizations that I was invited into that made a huge difference. One of them was I was invited into the Women's Leadership Board at Harvard, where I got to meet a lot of women at a similar level as myself. And also I was invited into a phenomenal organization called Belize Grove, which is a network of women at executive level, for that exact reason, that you want to have a place where you can let your hair down and you can actually sit and talk to people about anything, and it doesn't go outside that organization or that circle. Enormous trust, enormous sisterhood, and I would definitely not be, I think, where I am today if it hadn't been for certainly the women I've gotten to know through Belize Grove and a lot of my friends and family, and they are of course the core. But it was important also to sit somewhere with a group of women that are exactly going through the same things on a professional level, and then have them to sort of back you up and as a support system. So I would say for anybody, you have to have a support system. If it is a mentor, I always think we all need mentors at all the time, and I had a mentor and I still have him. but also friends around you, and definitely have some sort of network groups where it's not your friends, it's not your family, it's actually people that professionally are doing similar to you and that you can share that with. So absolutely.
So, looking back, you a few years ago, you stepped down from IKEA, you stepped out of, big corporate on a day-to-day level. And I know you spent some time, designing your life. I love that title. Looking back, are you happy with how everything turned out? If you could change something, would there be something you would change?
I can't tell you how happy I am, and I mean that in sort of in the most humble way. I feel that I have just had a fabulous life. I feel like I have a very rich life, and I also feel I work hard at it. And I think there's many times where I miss sometimes having colleagues around, and there's times where I still don't want to get on a plane, and there's times where you can feel lonely or you have a bad day, but I could not be more happy, and I think I would not change a thing. And I guess actually one of the most significant decisions I made was actually to have the courage to leave IKEA when everything was really in a good place, and that I was still pretty young, and I allowed myself to take a year off. And it has been a number of years before I have come to designing, this life that was after IKEA, and it's still on, sort of emerging and developing. But I think it does take work. It takes some courage to make some changes, and you got to be honest with yourself, and you got to constantly ask for input and help and feedback. I would say that there's not a thing I would change.
That's amazing. I wish I could say that. I'm sure I feel the same in terms of being very, very grateful, and I feel wonderful about where I am right now. There were a few things I probably would have changed, but that's the way it is. Every one of those things that didn't go well, God knows I learned so much from them. So I wouldn't change those. I'm not trying to take away failure, because truthfully, failure was one of the most beneficial experiences I had. So we're wrapping up now. Your last word on this. What would you tell other women? You have built the career and the life of your dreams. What would you tell other women who are not so far along the track and are trying to do the same? Is there like a big piece of advice or a final thought you'd have?
I would say two things. One is, be patient and kind with yourself. We have a whole life, and often we're in such a hurry. And the second part is, I really have spent a lot of time in my life through IKEA, but also now after I left IKEA, on paying attention to myself and what it is I want. And I think that work is worthwhile. And so when I think about, you would not think about building a company and not have a clear mission for what that company is supposed to do and what mission are they on to accomplish. What are the core values of that company, and what is it that are the principles that you live by, and a plan for how to be successful. And I just feel that most of us, including myself, go through life without doing that work ourselves. And that was really kind of my when I wrote my book in Danish, that was really how it came out the first time. It was called If Your Life Was a Kitchen.
I love it.
Yeah, you wouldn't think about building your perfect kitchen. And we all spent a lot of time and energy on creating the perfect kitchen. We want to get expert help. We know it takes money, it takes effort. And then when it comes to our personal life, many of us, we just sort of hope that one day we'll be happy. And I just feel that my message is, it is worth the work to be much clear on who you are, what you desire, what's your personal mission. Keep in touch with yourself all the time. And I think that work, I can share, for me, the last 5 years, that has helped me in finding the next part of my life, get re-energized, refocused. And I just think that work is important. And I would just encourage everybody to do that.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much, Pernille. It's been such a pleasure to have you. If our listeners want to know more about your book and your course, where could they find more information about you?
Yeah, they can go to www.goodlifedesigned with an ED at the end, goodlifedesigned.com. And our course is available through goodlifedesigned.mykajabi.com.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Pivot Points, a series designed to help ambitious women have the careers and lives of their dreams. To hear more interviews, go to www.yourcareeryourterms.com. And be sure to tell us what you think. If there are topics you'd like covered or people you'd like interviewed,